Welcome to the EntrePastors Podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello there, and welcome to the EntrePastors Podcast on YouTube. I'm John Sanders. I'm one of the co-founders of EntrePastors, and I'm so grateful to have you joining us for this week's episode. Today on the show, we're going to be hearing from Trevor Hislop, who has been a pastor in several different pastoral roles over the years, and more recently has transitioned into a career in the world of behavioral health. In a clinical setting, and he's owning and operating his own practice. So this is a little bit different story than what we hear a lot of times about pastors who are out in the marketplace, providing kind of a service-based business or an information-based business. This is in a little bit more of a clinical setting, but the themes are all there, though. The themes are still the same of a pastor who served for a while in the church setting and is now utilizing that skill set out in the marketplace to serve people in a different type of ministry capacity that just looks to be a little bit more profitable than what oftentimes pastoral ministry is. So we got a great conversation coming your way about Trevor's journey from pastoral ministry to behavioral health. And I know you're going to take some great value from this. So without any further ado, check out this conversation that we had recently with our friend Trevor Hislop. Here we go. Well, Trevor, it is our pleasure to welcome you to the EntrePastors Podcast, my friend. Welcome to the show.
It is great to be with you, John, and Les, thanks for having me.
I've been looking forward to this conversation. We got connected, I believe, through one of our past guests on this podcast, Brian Stroh, who's a mutual friend, and when I met you and heard a little bit about your story, I thought, man, this will be a great conversation to share with our community. So why don't we start with kind of a 30,000-foot overview? Just give us a little bit of an introduction to you and the work that you do, and then we'll start digging down into your story.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I am a marriage and family therapist, founding member of a team called LiveWell Behavioral Health in Central Florida. We're a clinical mental health provider. And work with a national team called Pastoral. And so that's the current work that I do.
Okay, fabulous. Now, do you have a background in pastoral ministry?
I do, yeah. So just a little bit about that in my story. So I pastored for 18 years in churches around the country, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and Sacramento, California, back in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and then in Melbourne, Florida.
What was your role in pastoral ministry in all those years? What were some of the different roles you served in?
Yeah, a lot of the roles were in production and the creative arts. So I worked as a worship pastor or service programming pastor. Also did some work as an executive pastor in some of those churches. One of the churches specifically did what was called a church renewal project, which is helping them heal through a season of difficulty and helping them through some staff transitions.
So would you say that in those years that you're serving in that role specifically, the seeds were probably already there in terms of the work you're doing now, like, the coaching, the counseling, the marriage and family therapy, that sort of thing. I can see that skill set at play there, but how did that grow and develop to where eventually you transitioned into that as kind of your full-time ministry?
Yeah. Let me just share a little bit of my personal story. So grew up in the suburbs of St. Paul, Minneapolis, Minnesota. And when I was 13, my parents got divorced and our family had to go through the difficult, season of navigating what that looked like. So I grew up in a Christian home and then grew up in one of those families where, on the outside, it was like, we were the good Christian family. And yet, obviously, something was struggling on the inside. And so at 13 years old, parents divorced. I'm the third child of four. And so I remember going to see a school counselor, and that essentially changed my life. I went to go see a school counselor and just had a couple sessions with that individual, but came out of that with this sense of what I would now call calling. At 13 years old, I didn't know what to call it. I just knew that at that time, I just knew that I wanted to do for others what that person did for me, which was just to help people on their journey. And so So that led into taking an AP class in high school on psychology, getting a bachelor's degree in psychology and sociology, going on to grad school, getting a master's in marriage and family therapy. Like, it started to progress early for me of just what that looked like. And so my initial plan, my plan, right, was to go into vocational mental health straight out of grad school. Through a journey of interning at churches and having mentors speak into my life. The school that I was attending for that MFT program was also a seminary. So I ended up staying in school, getting an MDiv, and then God led us into pastoral ministry out of that. And so for those 18 years, I was functioning professionally as a pastor, but doing it in a way of shepherding with care and support as a counselor. And then that kind of fast forward to the season of where I felt like God was calling me to step away from vocational church ministry into what I do now in vocational care for others through clinical counseling.
So when you kind of stepped into the vocational ministry role,
Yeah.
was there a sense that this was just for a season, that someday I'm going to be moving more in the direction of where I originally felt called to go in terms of the vocational counseling, therapy, and that sort of thing? Did you see it as just a stepping, stone from one to the other?
No, I didn't. I really felt like God had called me to the local church. In fact, that was just part of my journey in those years of sense of calling, was to support the local church. And so through that season, felt like I was able to wear the professional hat of pastor, but again, doing that in such a way that I could care for and counsel people. So for many, many years, no plans or no desires to leave that role. Is the way that I was functioning again in it as a pastor.
Okay, so then I'm going to describe kind of two thoughts that we deal with regularly with our community.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily saying that either of these belong to you, but I want to poke around in as a part of your story, so maybe you can see yourself or not see yourself in these two thoughts here. So the one thought is, I believe that sometimes the right people go into pastoral ministry for the wrong reasons. What I mean by that is they want to serve God, they love the Lord, and they feel called to something, and then someone kind of steps into their path and goes, well, clearly if you're called by God, you're going to be a missionary or a pastor. And then they end
Right.
up in this vocational ministry role that in hindsight, maybe there could have been some other options that would have fit them better than pastoring. So that's one thought. The other is on that side where pastors are stepping away from vocational ministry into what I call a new season of ministry, which is out in the marketplace doing something that doesn't look like, directly pastoring or preaching or leading a church. So often it seems there's a real mental struggle around that idea of calling, like, and my identity. Who am I now if I'm no longer pastor so and so? So I'm kind of curious on both kind of those bookends of your story. Do you see that at work? Not necessarily do you regret going into pastoral ministry, but to what degree was that there where someone maybe influenced you in that direction that maybe wasn't even, the path necessarily? And then on the other end, as you were stepping out of that, talk about any mental struggle that you had in terms of that whole identity of who am I if I'm not on staff at a church?
Sure. I think that's a great question, and I love the framework and this idea of the bookends, of how I got into it and maybe how I stepped away from it, how I got out of it. Yeah, and the sense of calling into the local church ministry. I don't recall there being a sense of feeling pressured or pushed into it as if it was somebody else's idea rather than mine, or that it was a path that had no other options available to me. The quick part of that is I'm a musician, and I was actually doing some traveling and some touring, and I was able to experience the local church like all over the country and even into Canada. And it was through that journey that God kind of pressed on my heart, like, hey, to be able to step into. So I do remember experiencing kind of my own tension of, I think the practical part of I'd gone to school, I'd started my journey towards counseling, even had aspirations of I'm going to make a lot of money. This is going to be awesome. Like some kind of facade or some kind of dream of what it would be, could be, even though it wasn't about the money. There was this sense of like, okay, there's a real path forward with clinical work and counseling. And yet when I felt God called me into pastoral ministry, there was also this similar sort of like, well, what is that going to look like? Nobody in my family had ever pastored before. I didn't grow up in a pastor's home. I remember hearing about, when I was younger, the horror stories of pastors are underpaid and underappreciated and all the other unders that we could come up with.
Mm-hmm.
And yet feel like God, that's exactly where God was calling me and my family. So externally, I don't remember a lot of pressure and push, but I do internally remember the tension between, hey, what's this going to look like? How's this going to work? And then as I got into pastoral ministry, I did really feel a sense of like, this is exactly where I need to be. And this is exactly what God has called me to do.
Well, it sounds like you were making the best decision going on the information that you had, at the time and your pilgrimage at the time. But let's just think hypothetically, if you knew back then what you know now about the different options, you think you'd still go the same route, or would you do something different? Not regret, by the way, just if you had different information.
That's a great question. I mean, that hindsight kind of question. I think in God's sovereignty, he knows what he's doing. Right. And so I appreciate your portion there about, regret. I don't have any regret in that.
No.
In fact, but I do actually appreciate those 18 years of hands-on, boots on the ground, pastoral ministry, because I do feel in many ways it has prepared me to do what I'm doing now.
No doubt. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I feel similar. Like if I were to do it over knowing what I know now, it would look different. I would plant a church very differently. If there had been an EntrePastors giving me permission and other options, it may have looked very different than kind of the traditional church planting route I went. But I don't say that with any regret. And I agree 100% with what you're saying. Like God in his sovereignty still used me and others, and, good came from it. So there's no like regret. It's more just, man, if we can maybe step into some other people's stories and be, provide some other options. So I'm not trying to talk anybody out of pastoring in the church if that's what God has truly called them to. I'm parking on this subject of calling because a lot of times in pastoral world, it's such a heavy thing. Calling. I believe everyone has a calling of God on their life, but sometimes we put this really heavy and mysterious thing about calling into pastoral work that really kind of trips pastors up. Then when a new season is upon them and they really need to pivot and shift, we've put so much weight and emphasis on calling that it really kind of, to the other end of the other bookend, really makes a struggle then when they need to transition into a new way of serving the Lord and serving other people that just looks different than the vocation of pastoring. So when you were on that end of it, let's talk about that, as you kind of now transitioned into the professional world that you're in and the way you're serving people now. Was that a pretty smooth transition, or was there some real hurdles and mindset stuff you had to work through?
Yeah, there was several hurdles for me to navigate through that. So if I just kind of go back in my timeline of serving in vocationally in pastoral roles, like I said, we had moved from South Dakota to California, from California back to South Dakota, from South Dakota to Florida, and all of those years of local church ministry and serving here in Florida. Again, felt like God was still, at work in that of pastoral kind of calling that he had given to me. But there was a season, this was probably 6-7 years ago, just started to feel restless in my role, restless in what God was doing. Decided to go back to school. I thought maybe that was the fix. Maybe I just need something to do, something to challenge me and something to me going. And so I got my doctorate. In the midst of that was, in fact, part of the reason for going back to school is was starting to recognize, not just locally, but as I was connecting regionally and nationally, some of the struggle within the organization of the church. And so I got my doctorate in organizational health. I mean, it was like a very intentional effort for me to be able to say, hey, not only what am I learning and how am I growing through a season of uneasiness, but how might God use that, in my life and in the lives of others. And so through that, felt this restlessness in the sense of, I was gainfully employed. I had job security. I had all of this that kind of said, hey, just hang on, keep doing your job, be faithful. Right. In fact, there was 1 year in the midst of that where that was my word of the year was be faithful. And so I felt like God just, gave me that. And that was part of the journey. But in the midst of that restlessness kind of kept growing in me. And in fact, that was also through the time of when COVID hit. So like COVID hit and I was serving in the local church and felt like God had maybe, given me a sense of release, but I felt compelled to stay and support a church, through COVID, and then be available to support other churches through their journey with COVID. And so it was on the backside of that, as things were for me kind of continuing to increase in stress and strain. I think now looking back would even say I was experiencing probably some burnout. And so I, myself maybe wasn't in the best of places as I was trying to support everyone else to make sure that they were doing better, and probably neglected some of my own self-care and some of my own soul care.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, this was in the fall of 2020. So I resigned from my position in the church, and I resigned to unemployment. I mean, like there was this, sense of like I had known for years that God was churning in me something new, and there was trying to figure out what now and what next. And in the midst of that, hanging on, to one thing, which was the job and the role that I had, and not yet ready to grab on to whatever God had next for me. And so it was an extremely difficult season. And so for, that was probably two months of just wrestling, like what now and what next. And my first knee-jerk reaction was just to update my resume and go find the next church job, because after 18 years, that's all my resume said. And I had the sense of that's all I was capable of. That's all I could do. And so God used, again, mentors in my life, and used, books and podcasts and, different resources to help kind of speak into me, to slow down, take a deep breath, lean into what God was doing, which ultimately opened the door for what I'm doing today.
Well, you're living John's dream life down there in Florida. He so badly wants to move from South Dakota down to where, your neck of the woods. So I know y'all have a follow-up meeting probably, and John's going to find out what
for sure
is. Crack the code.
Two themes in what you just said there that I really want to draw people's attention to. The first is that word restlessness. At least in my own life, I have learned to hear God's voice in that much of the time. I mean, again, discernment is needed, godly counsel is needed, because not all restlessness is from the Lord, but there is a holy restlessness or a holy discontent that I have experienced at some key pivotal points in my life where I've learned to see God's hand moving in that. But it can be a frustrating time because he doesn't always just show you the exact next step. There's a period of just kind of a restlessness of he's getting ready to close some chapters on things and close some doors and open up some new opportunities. So really not a question there. Just want to highlight that for any of our listeners that might be experiencing that same thing. And then something else you said that is really profound. We see it so often in our community, pastors who have known their entire kind of professional life, church world, they went to Bible college, seminary, and now they've been in and around pastoral ministry. When they make a pivot or when they start thinking about a new season, almost always it brings them back to the church. Not that that's bad. I understand why that is. But even when they think about doing something entrepreneurial, so much of the time their business is built around serving the church. And again, maybe at times it's okay. And at other times I want to expand their thinking to go, there's a much bigger world out there beyond the church. There's a marketplace where there's a ton of people who need the Lord and who need ministry, and you can serve them through whatever your new business is. So again, no real question in that other than just wanting our audience to not miss what you said that was really critical.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk some business stuff here, because in some ways, I'll make a statement and you can either agree or push back or kind of alter what I'm saying. I would see what you're doing as an entrepreneurial thing. I mean, we don't often think of, therapists and counselors and clinicians as entrepreneurs. And yet when you're starting your own practice, which I'm assuming you have, right? You're not just employed, you started something. So there is an entrepreneurial element to that. I'll just leave it at that. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, it has absolutely been an entrepreneurial adventure to do what we've done. Just I guess the quick story of that. A good friend of mine, Mike Ronsons-Valley, he's a clinical psychologist, and he had sold a practice, and he was getting to launch something new, and so he invited me to join him on that journey. And so through that work is what became LiveWell Behavioral Health, and
Okay.
So it's been 3.5 years. And it's been an incredible journey to stand in the space of mental health and to be able to help close some of the gaps for individuals, couples, families, entire communities, locally and regionally. And God has been incredibly faithful through that work.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's awesome. And again, it's not a stretch to see the ministry. We often say to our community that business is ministry. And maybe some businesses, it's a little bit more of a stretch. We have to really help connect the dots and show people how those businesses can be showing up and serving in a ministerial capacity. But obviously, this one, it's not a big leap at all to recognize how you're directly impacting people's mental wellness, their marriages, their relationships, their soul care, to use a word that you used earlier.
Yeah.
So clearly you're in a position of serving and helping people through that. So tell us a little bit, let's jump a little bit deeper into some of the ways that you're doing that. At the beginning, you mentioned Pastor Serve is an organization you're involved with. And you were also telling me and Les, I think before we hit record, about your LiveWell Center for Health and Wellness. So tell us a little bit about that and just riff in any direction you want to take those things.
Sure. Yeah. Let me start with Pastor Serve, and then I'll talk a little bit more about LiveWell. So Pastor Serve is an incredible organization. It's been around for about 25 years, and it is built around the mission of serving and caring for pastors and their families and the communities that they serve. And so Pastor Serve, its national headquarters are in Kansas City. And the team with Pastor Serve, they primarily do crisis care. They provide coaching, and they do consulting, again, for pastors, for ministry leaders, and their staff and their church communities. And so I joined that team in that transition as I was trying to figure out what was next. And so to your point earlier, like I desperately had this like sense of like I need to stay connected to the church. Like I needed to figure out like, how can I still be Pastor Trevor and not just what eventually became Dr. Trevor? So to be able to say, hey, I felt that tension there, but in this case, in a really positive way. Where God allowed me to join and support the team and the work that they're doing at Pastor Serve. And so maybe just a quick plug for anybody who's listening and they're looking for crisis care, they're looking for coaching, they're looking for consulting for themselves, for staff members, for their church. Pastor Serve would love to be a part of that. PastorServe.org is where you can find all the information. So then through that same journey, I'll talk about LiveWell. So when I was transitioning from the local church to ultimately starting a practice, when we started, there was myself, Mike, I mentioned, who's the founder, another therapist, and 2 office staff members. And we were just trying to figure out where to go and what to do. And so if I just tie in a little bit of the business side of this to it. So, we started out trying to just look for some 1099 contractors, just tried to find some people, who could come and work for us, but keep the overhead low, and so that model is very common in the counseling industry. And so quickly built a team around that. It was, from a leadership perspective, it was really important for us to be able to assess the gaps in the system in our community. Like we just didn't want to, open another clinic and hang another shingle to compete with everybody else. It was really, really important to us to be able to say, hey, what's missing? What hasn't been thought of? What's not here in our community, and what services are not available? And so with LiveWell Behavioral Health, from the very, very beginning, it was again assessing what are the needs and how can we meet the needs. And so what we quickly found, and this is true, I think, in mental health in general and just in healthcare, is the difficulty of navigating the systems from provider to provider to provider to provider. So a very, very common story. Somebody comes to their therapist because they're anxious and said, okay, then the therapist has to refer them to a medical provider, who may put them on a medication. The medical provider might push them back to the therapist. The therapist might recognize in the midst of that, part of what's causing or creating anxiety is their marriage, but they don't do marriage therapy. So they have to send them to somebody else for marriage therapy. They get to marriage therapy and find out their kid is struggling, but they don't do kids. And so they have to tie them to another therapist. Then they find out, that there's some testing that needs to be done, but they don't do testing. So now they got to go find a psychometrician, or they got to find somebody in that industry to help them out. Then they find out that after testing that their kid is, got ADHD or ASD or something, but they don't do that. And so they have to send another, the list just goes on and on and on of navigating the healthcare system. And so one of the things for us from the very, very beginning was to be able to say, hey, can we create a system and can we develop a team, where we're able to close those gaps and we're able to serve, individuals, couples, families, and entire communities in under one roof, with one team that collaborates and connects and treatment plans together and cares for the whole system of the family, all in one place. And so that's the practice that we've built. I think we now have 29 providers on our staff.
Wow,
I think
that's great.
Staff of 37 in total. And so we do traditional outpatient therapy. We also do intensive outpatient therapy. One of the gaps in our community is there was not any intensive programming for adolescents, and so we were one of the first to start an adolescent intensive outpatient program. We were one of the first to pair therapy with psychiatry, and so we have a medical staff of psychiatrists and psychiatric nurse practitioners. We have psychometricians who do testing for us. We have TMS, which is a medical procedure for depression. So we've been able to just build a practice really just based on, hey, what are the needs? How can we step in and support that? And then, with God's leading, get the right people on the team to provide the right services, to be able to continue that work.
That's cool. When I hear that, and this may be a really a rough analogy, but I hear you. That's kind of like you guys are the Mayo Clinic of the mental health industry. I mean, if you don't know, the Mayo Clinic is where you go to kind of bypass all of that other stuff, where you just get all, kind of a singular plan of treatment where everybody's all under the same roof, working on the same strategy. And I have very limited knowledge of it, but that's what I heard anyway. So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
cool, man.
Yeah, that's exactly it, and that's what we're continuing to do. So our team, just the kind of at the core, is collaborative, like interdisciplinary team who just we do as much as we can together.
That's cool. I'll tell you this, Trevor. One of the things we say often at EntrePastors is we do not have a one-size-fits-all approach, and so I love sharing stories like yours because through this podcast we just want to share a wide range of practical things that pastors can take out into the marketplace and do various things. We help pastors all the time understand that you have all kinds of gifts that you've been using in pastoral ministry that are very applicable to the marketplace. Now, in your situation, obviously there's specific schooling and credentialing that needs to happen. But again, I know for a number of pastors, that's something that they're already gravitating towards. I mean, it's already leaning into a skill set they're developing and have been kind of honing in their years as pastors. So I love that part of your story. I think you're kind of the first clinician in this realm that we've interviewed that's out doing something in the marketplace like this. So this is a really cool story to share with our people.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to share the story. In fact, one of the things, maybe just connecting, talk about the church world and then this clinical world. One of the things that was important for us is to provide trusted resources to the local church. And so, whether that is locally or that could be nationally, in our work with churches and with pastors, I find it increasingly difficult for pastors to find someone they can trust. I mean, someone that they can either personally open up to and feel like it's safe and it's confidential and it's trusted and all of that. But also when they're doing on the front lines of caring for other people, right? Who are they going to send them to?
Mm-hmm.
You know, for many pastors, feel ill-equipped, to do any work of counseling. And so, whether that's through our team or through, wherever those pastors are, in their communities, find providers, who they can partner with, who they can build trusted relationships with, again, whether it's for them or for their family, for their staff, or for their church family. That's significant. And so from a business model, that was one of the things that was really important to us. In fact, that was one of the strategic recurring revenue models. If we can just keep caring for the pastors and caring for their staffs, they in turn, become a trusted referral source, us for them and them for us, to be able to support the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Trevor, if we could ask a question from a different vantage point than what we usually get to hear it. We talk to a lot of people who, for various reasons, are making a transition or a shift for them from vocational, a pastoral role of some sort, often full-time, over to being what the term that we've created is EntrePastor, where they're in some sort of entrepreneurial endeavor. It could be what we refer to as the information space, which is really what we're doing right now with podcasting and blogging and writing and those kinds of things. Or it could be a service-based business of some kind of hands-on. There are a few tracks, that we describe in our community. So if somebody came to you with that kind of, bent and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about making a shift and this is something I'm considering," what are some of the questions you would ask that person, or what are some of the things that you would have them consider if they're thinking about taking on what can be a pretty significant shift?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things I'd be curious right away is, is there, if they're shifting away from or adding to, I think, in the role of pastors, because we know many pastors serve in the local church and they're entrepreneuring outside the walls of the church.
Right.
And then there are we're talking about those who have served locally in the church and are stepping away to go do something in the marketplace. And so in the midst of that, I often, when I'm working with ministry leaders, I often just, try to help them navigate or understand what it is happening inside of them, that they've gotten to this place. If particularly they're stepping away from local church ministry and branching out into something in the marketplace, is, I'll often ask the question and assess with them, what do you feel like you're running from? So if there's some hurt and if there's some maybe discord, in the local church, in the staff, or just in the challenges of pastoring. So what are you running from? And then I'll ask them, what are you running towards? To just get a sense of, okay, so is this, they're running from something and looking for anything, that will just give them an exit ramp, from that. Right. And there's hurt and there's pain and, there's trauma involved and all that. Or this running towards, or is it there's a sense of vision and calling. There's a sense of mission that there's something forward thinking for them. Mm-hmm. In fact, I'll also talk about it in the ways of the idea of leading in crisis versus leading in calling. For some, they're in crisis.
Yeah.
And so whether they're just trying to navigate it and lead through it, or they just feel like they just need to get off the crazy train, of whatever this crisis situation is. Mm-hmm. And in the midst of that, talk with them about crisis and talk with them about calling. And maybe just another piece of that, and this has been part of my journey, and as I've met with many ministry leaders, I've experienced as part of their journey, is calling, is not it's not a job description, it's not a corner office, it's not a title on a business card, right? It's so much more than that. And so helping those who feel a calling of shepherding or calling of pastoring to help them, expand their view of what that calling really is, right? You can pastor in the marketplace. You can shepherd in the workplace. And whatever the role is, whether you carry the official title of pastor or not, once you leave the position in the church, it doesn't change the sense of purpose and calling that one might feel.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, and just
it is good.
Going back a second, I was thinking as you were talking, I would say probably the majority of our audience are what you said, Trevor. They're pastors who are pastoring and also doing something out in the marketplace, which we fully celebrate, and we're here to support and encourage and walk beside those guys and gals. And also we serve those who, like you also said, are maybe looking for a whole new season. They're ready to be done. I think for far too long, there have not been healthy off-ramps from pastoral ministry. And so pastors choose or fall into some very unhealthy ways out of ministry that leave a whole wake of pain in their past and hurt people and broken lives, rather than being told, hey, it's okay. Like, it's okay to serve the Lord in a new season of ministry. So we don't have a preference one way or the other. Again, we want to serve pastors.
There's really not a predominant path, which probably 50-50. I mean, there's no real pattern to it.
Yeah. So this has been really helpful, Trevor, and we're going to link in the show notes to your various websites of these organizations that you've mentioned. But if someone listening wanted to reach out and connect with you, is that possible? And if so, what's the best way for them to find you and connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. For the best way to reach out to me, and I'll just give you my contact information for LiveWell. So it's just Trevor, Trevor, and then at LiveWellBehavioralHealth.com. And so if there is something that I and our team can do here at LiveWell, whether that is in the clinical work that we do, or through the work of the team of Pastor Serve, would love to do that. And so in either case, whether that is some coaching or some counseling, do a lot of marriage intensives, so just supporting a lot of ministry couples in the work that they do, as an extension of that, where they just need a trusted person in a safe place, to work on themselves. We have an app called the LiveWell app. You can find it in the App Store, which just has some incredible like mental health and wellness resources. Just getting ready to launch the LiveWell Center for Health and Wellness. And so even though we're a for-profit company, we've decided to step into the nonprofit space. And so that's a whole nother venture for us to be able to provide and create content and resources, not just locally, but nationally or globally.
That's awesome, man.
Good, man.
Well, it's been really helpful. Thank you for your time, Trevor, and thank you for the ways that you're serving God and others in this season. We're grateful for you adding value to our community today.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you, Les. It's been a pleasure to be with you guys.
All right.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors Podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.